Gracias. Agradezco a la representante de Reino Unido por su declaración. Tiene ahora la palabra el representante de Brasil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Brazil welcomes today's adoption. We thank the United Arab Emirates for tirelessly conducting and facilitating the negotiations and also for organizing the trip to Rafah, which enabled a first-hand account of the challenging humanitarian work being carried out in the region. This terrible crisis tests our humanity daily. The time for a humanitarian response to the suffering of civilians in Gaza is now, not tomorrow, not when this conflict finally ends. After more than 70 days of hostilities, the situation in Gaza is dire. The remaining hostages must be released immediately. Civilians and civilian facilities must be protected. This is not just a moral or ethical choice, it is an obligation under international humanitarian law, as is humanitarian access. The amount of aid allowed into Gaza must be substantially increased to meet the needs of the people who depend on it throughout Gaza and should contain all essential items, including fuel. Egypt's efforts to facilitate the use of Rafah crossing by United Nations humanitarian agencies and their implementing partners has been crucial. We welcome the recent announcement by Israel of the opening of the Kerem Shalom crossing for the direct delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Brazil calls for the full implementation of the adopted resolutions. Today's resolution provides for a monitoring mechanism for the UN to inspect the delivery of aid. The UN must be provided with the necessary means to carry out this task. The aim is to increase and expedite the entry and delivery of much-needed international assistance. The Council must remain seized of the matter for as long as it takes. And Mr. President, since this is probably our last formal session during our current mandate, I would like to thank all members of this Council for the trust and cooperation with our delegation during these 2 years. I speak on behalf of my entire delegation and of my capital in expressing how much we appreciated working with all of you at different levels and in a vast array of very important topics on the UN agenda of peace and security. We end our term with a sense of accomplishment of the priorities that Brazil always sets when discharging its duties at the UN in general and as a non-permanent member of this Council. We tried our best to engage constructively with all delegations in order to achieve concrete results in this vast and complex agenda of international peace and security in a growingly complex and challenging world. 5 participations of our foreign minister at council meetings in October, in November on the Palestine question illustrate the importance we attach to the council and to the matters under its consideration. We championed our positions while respecting the diversity of values, opinions and interests within the council in order to adequately fulfill our role as a non-permanent member for the 11th time in this body's history. Once again, with President Lula's leadership and personal involvement, Brazil tried hard to make a serious contribution to this collective effort by just being Brazil, the Brazil that is back, a country that talks to every country in the friendliest ways, has no quarrels except with poverty, inequality, and inhumanity and injustice, has an engaged interest in all important matters discussed in the UN, that builds bridges, seeks consensus, acts faithfully as an honest broker, and values and defends peace, the international law, multilateralism, and their synthesis and symbol, the Charter of the United Nations. And most of all, if I may borrow Lincoln's words, a country that acts without malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. And if I may add a personal note, I'm most thankful for these 6 months of crash course in multilateral affairs in this worldly classroom. You, dear colleagues, and your teams have all been wonderful teachers to this old bilateralist who hopes to have learned at least some of the multiple skills and statesmanship that you show here every single session. Thank you very much again, and happy holidays. Thank you.
Agradezco al representante de
I
Brasil
thank
por
the
su
representative
declaración.
of Brazil for his
Tiene
statement.
ahora la palabra
And I'll give
la
the floor to
representante
the
de Malta.
representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. And Malta thanks the United Arab Emirates for taking the initiative to work on this resolution. I express our appreciation to Ambassador Nuseba and her team for their valiant efforts and for organizing the very important trip to Rafah. Malta has consistently expressed grave concern and sought to alleviate the dire humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. Over the past 3 months, this humanitarian crisis has been severely aggravated by the obstruction of adequate emergency humanitarian aid, personnel, and food and water into Gaza. The untenable situation required our urgent attention. This is why we have voted in favor of this text, and we demand for the full implementation of this and Resolution 2712. However, we remain firm in our belief that an immediate ceasefire is the only tangible and realistic measure that can ease the suffering and extreme hardship of the Gazan people. We reiterate that all parties must comply with their obligations under international law, including those regarding the protection of civilians and civilian sites, with accountability for those who violate them. Medical and humanitarian personnel and their assets must be protected to allow the population safety, reprieve, dignity, and in times of acute crisis and anguish. We are already much too late. We welcome the establishment of an aid monitoring mechanism for Gaza as outlined in this resolution. However, its implementation must not add an additional barrier or slow down the principal's delivery of humanitarian assistance. On the contrary, it should rapidly and efficiently facilitate it. We expect that the technical expertise and vast experience of the UN will direct the implementation of this mechanism in coordination with relevant states. Without this, the desperately needed UN humanitarian response will be placed in jeopardy, and the UN and humanitarian staff be placed at great risk. In closing, President, the end of hostilities must also be accompanied with a political urgency to build a durable foundation for peace. We welcome the resolution's clear and unwavering commitment to the two-state solution, where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace and security in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. I thank you.
Agradezco a la representante de Malta
The
por su
representative of
declaración.
Malta for her
Tiene ahora la
statement.
palabra el
And I'll
representante
give
de
the floor
China.
to the representative of China.
主席先生，
Mr. President,
安理会今天这次表决一再推迟，受到
repeatedly
各方广泛关
postponed
注。
council vote today has
在过去
received
几天里，
extensive
为
attention
最
by
大
all.
限度
Over
凝
the
聚
past
共
few
识，
days, in order to
阿联酋
maximize
代表团
consensus,
做
the
出了不懈
UAE
努力，
delegation made
于昨
tireless
天深
efforts
夜
and
重新提
resubmitted
交了决
the
议草
draft
案。
resolution late last
我们对
night.
安理会
We
刚刚表
welcome
决
the
通过这项决
adoption
议
of this
草案
draft
表示
resolution that
欢
was
迎，
put to vote just now.
因为众所周知的
For
原因
reasons known to，
这项
all,
决议草案
this draft
在一些
resolution
重要方
has
面
made
做
quite
了
a
不少
number of
调整，
adjustments in some
与我
important
们努力的
aspects,
方向
and these
并不一致，
adjustments are not
并没有达
consistent
到
with the efforts
我
we
们的
made
预期。
and do not meet our expectations.
同时，考
At
虑
the
到
same
当
time,
前紧迫
given
形
the
势
urgency
和
of the
加沙地
situation
带
on the
日甚
ground,
一日
and
的
given the
人道灾难，
humanitarian catastrophe in
安理
Gaza
会
that
的
is
这次
getting
行
more
动
dire by the
至少
day, the
还
Council's
是为
present
推动
action
人道物
offers at
资
least a
更多、
glimmer
更
of
快
hope
进入
for
加沙
more and faster
带来一
delivery
线
of
希望。
humanitarian supplies to Gaza.
当然，
Of course,
能否让灾难
whether
中的
this
加沙民
glimmer of
众
hope can be
真正
truly
感受到
felt
这一
by the
线希
people
望
of，Gaza in the
还
midst of
取
this
决于
disaster
决议
also
否切实
depends
得
on
到
whether
执
the
行，
resolution can be
决议
effectively
有关要
implemented
求
and whether
能
the
否不置
relevant
不扣
provisions
地
of the
落到
resolution
实处
can。be carried out without compromise.
我们期待根据安理会决
We
议要
expect
求，
urgent
采
actions
取
to be
紧急
taken
行动，
pursuant to this Council
扩大对
resolution
加
to
沙的人道
expand
援助，
humanitarian
包
assistance
括
to
充
Gaza,
分利用凯雷
including
姆
by
沙洛姆
making
过
full
境点，
use of the Karem
并
Shalom
增开
crossing
其他
and the
过境点，
opening of additional
确保
crossings
充
to
足的人道
ensure
物
the
资
safe
安
and
全
unimpeded
和不受
entry
阻碍
of
地进入
sufficient
加沙。
humanitarian supplies into Gaza.
我们希望
We
决议
hope
新确立
that
的
the
监督机
monitoring
制
mechanism
尽快到
newly
位，
provided for in the
期待秘
resolution
书
will
长
be put
及
in
时
place as soon
向
as
安理
possible.
会报
We
告
look
决
forward
议
to
执行
SD's
情况。
timely reporting to the Council
安理
on the
会应该
implementation
随
of
时
this
准备
resolution.
采取
The
进一
Council
步行
should
动，
stand
解
ready
决
to take
决
further
议执
actions
行
at
中
any time
遇
to
到的问
resolve
题
the
和困
problems
难。
and difficulties encountered in the
决议
implementation
重
of the
申，冲
resolution.
突各方
The
都应该
resolution
遵守
reaffirms
国
that
际
all
法，
parties to
包
the
括
conflict should
国际
comply
人道
with the
法规定
obligations
的义务。
under international law,
我们
including
敦促以色
international
列立即
humanitarian
改
law.
弦
We
更张，
urge
停
Israel
止
to
无差
immediately
别
reverse
军
its
事进
course,
攻，
cease its
停止
indiscriminate
对加
military
沙民
attacks,
众的
and
集
stop
体
its
惩罚。
collective punishment of the
作
population
为
of
占领
Gaza.
方，
As the
以色
occupying
列
power,
有义务
Israel
保
has an
障加沙
obligation
民
to
众的人
safeguard
道
the
需求，
humanitarian needs for the
有义
population
务
of
保
Gaza
障
and to
在加
guarantee
沙
the
的人
safety
道工
of
作者安全。
humanitarian workers in Gaza.
主席先生，
Mr. President,
应该看到
it should be observed
实现
that
停
the
火仍然
realization
是
of a
压倒一切
ceasefire
的前提。
remains the overriding
只有停火
prerequisite. Only
才
a
能避
ceasefire
免
can
更大的
prevent
平民，
greater
包括
casualties of
人质
civilians,
伤亡。
including hostages.
只有停
Only
火
a
才能
ceasefire
避
can
免
prevent
地
the
区冲
regional
突
conflict
走
from
向失控。
spiraling out of
只
control.
有停
And
火
only
才
a
能避
ceasefire
免
can
政
prevent
治
the
解决
prospect for
前
a
景
political
彻
settlement
底葬
from
送。
being completely
这也是我
destroyed.
们投
This
票
is the
支持
reason
俄
why
罗斯
we
修
voted
正
in
案的
favor
原
of
因。
Russia's amendment.
同时，我们也对
We
修正
also
案被
regret
否
that this
决感
amendment
到遗
was
憾。
vetoed.
下一步，
Going forward,
中方愿
China
同
would
各
like to
位
work
成
with
员一
all
道，
Council members
继
to
续推
promote
动安理会
further
及时采
responsible and
取进一
meaningful
步
action by
负
the
责任、
Council
有
in a
意义的
timely
行动，
manner,
继
and
续
to
为早
continue
日
to
平
make
息
and
加沙
remedying
战火
efforts to bring
切
an
实
end to the
落实
fighting in
两国方
Gaza,
案，
to
实
effectively
现中东
implement
和平
the
稳定，
two-state solution,
做出
and
不
to
懈努
realize
力。
peace and stability in the
谢谢
Middle
主席。
East at an early date. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco al
I
representante
thank the
de China
representative
por su
of
declaración.
China for their
Tiene ahora la
statement.
palabra el
And I'll give the
representante
floor
de
to
Japón.
the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. The catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza needs urgent attention and meaningful action by this Council. Thus, we are deeply grateful for the UAE and our friends in the Arab group for their constructive engagement with all Council members to this end. Japan voted in favor of this resolution. Given the deepening humanitarian crisis, it is indispensable to immediately scale up emergency assistance to and throughout Gaza. There is no safe place for the people in Gaza, and they cannot wait any longer for the Council to act. We also demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Therefore, we are pleased that the Council finally adopted another resolution today to address urgent humanitarian needs in Gaza, and we hope this will be a first step towards real change on the ground. Mr. President, full-fledged but sensitive diplomacy is underway to further scale up emergency humanitarian assistance to Gaza. In this vein, we highly appreciate the serious diplomatic efforts that the United States has been conducting in the region to improve the situation on the ground. The entry of humanitarian convoys into Gaza through the Kerem Shalom crossing is one of the results of these efforts, but more needs to be done. Japan, as a responsible member of the Security Council, remains committed to addressing the devastating humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Even now, gunfire and bombardment continue, and this must stop immediately for a period that allows for meaningful humanitarian operation to aid those who are enduring this grave humanitarian catastrophe and suffering. Thank you, President.
Agradezco al representante de
Thank the
Japón por su
representative of
declaración.
Japan
Tiene
for
ahora
his
la
statement
palabra
and I
la
give the floor
representante
to
de
the
Suiza.
representative of
Merci,
Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
La Suisse a voté en faveur de
Switzerland
la
voted in
résolution
favour
et se
of the
félicite de
resolution
son
and
adoption.
we welcome its adoption.
Je tiens à remercier la
I would like
délégation
to thank the
émirataise
delegation of the United Arab
et toutes et tous
Emirates
les collègues,
and all
membres du
colleagues,
Conseil, mais
members
aussi
of
de
the
la
Council,
région,
but also from the
pour les
region,
efforts
for
inlassables
their
dans la
tireless
recherche d'un
efforts to
compromis
find a
afin de
compromise
pallier à la
in order
situation
to
humanitaire
alleviate the
catastrophique dans la
disastrous
bande de
humanitarian
Gaza.
situation
Il est
existing in the
essentiel que
Gaza
ce
Strip.
Conseil se
It's
prononce
essential
en
that this
faveur de la
Council
protection des
speak
civils.
to protect civilians.
Les images du point de
The
passage de Rafah
images of the
l'illustrent
Rafah
clairement.
crossing
La
clearly show
population
this.
civile
The
est
civilian
désespérée.
population is desperate.
Elle a besoin du soutien
It
immédiat
needs the
de la communauté
immediate support of the
internationale pour
international
survivre.
community to survive.
Si un tel compromis
If
reste par sa nature
This
bien en deçà de
compromise,
nombreuses attentes,
because of its nature,
l'adoption
is
de cette
below
résolution,
many
tout
expectations.
comme l'ouverture du
This
point de passage
resolution,
de
as well
Kerem
as the
Shalom, est une
opening up of
contribution
Kerem
à cet
Shalom
effet.
crossing, is a
La
contribution
résolution
to help.
prévoit un
The
poste de
resolution
coordination
provides for a
humanitaire
post of
et pour la
humanitarian and reconstruction
reconstruction chargé
coordinator
d'établir un mécanisme
to
onusien
establish a
qui doit
UN
permettre
mechanism
toute la
that
flexibilité
will
nécessaire
provide all
pour
the necessary
rationaliser et
flexibility
améliorer
to rationalize and
l'efficacité des
improve
procédures
the
et
effectiveness
assurer
of
que les biens
procedures and
humanitaires
ensure
arrivent le
that
plus vite
humanitarian
possible
aid is
aux
able
personnes dans le
to
besoin.
reach people that need it as soon
La
as
Suisse
possible.
salue l'accord trouvé
Switzerland
au sein du
welcomes the
Conseil qui
agreement
devra
found in the
contribuer à
Council
une
that
mise en
should
œuvre
contribute
efficace
to
de
an
l'aide
effective
humanitaire sur le
implementation
terrain
of
pour sauver des vies.
humanitarian aid on the ground
Dans le
to
même
save
but de
lives.
faciliter un
And
accès
also in
humanitaire
order to
rapide,
provide
sûr et
rapid,
sans
safe
entrave,
and unhindered
la résolution
humanitarian
appelle à
access,
créer
the
les conditions pour une
resolution calls
cessation
for
durable
the
des
conditions to be
hostilités.
created for a lasting
Celle-ci ne porte
ceasefire
pas
that
préjudice
does
au
not
droit d'Israël d'assurer sa défense et
prejudice
sa
Israel's
sécurité.
right to
Elle doit
defend its
permettre
security.
de
It
faciliter
should
la
make it
libération
possible
immédiate
to
et
ensure
inconditionnelle de
the
tous les otages
unconditional
retenus
immediate
depuis
release of
les
all
actes de
hostages
terreur
that
perpétrés
have
par
been
le
held
Hamas
since
le
the
7 octobre dernier,
terrorist
que
attacks
la
of the
Suisse
7th of
a
October
condamné
last that
fermement.
Switzerland firmly
La
condemned.
résolution d'aujourd'hui se doit d'être
resolution
complémentaire au droit international humanitaire,
is complementary to
selon
international
lequel toutes les
humanitarian
parties
law,
au
according to
conflit,
which all parties
ainsi
to
que
a
les États
conflict,
non
as well
belligérants,
as
ont
non-warring
l'obligation
parties, have the
d'autoriser et de
obligation to
faciliter les
authorize
opérations
and
de secours
facilitate
destinées
rescue
aux
operations
populations dans le
aimed
besoin.
to help
Je vous
the
remercie.
population in need. Thank you.
Agradezco a la
I thank
representante
the
de Suiza por su
representative of
declaración.
Switzerland for her statement.
Tiene ahora la
I now
palabra
give the
el
floor
representante
to
de
the
Albania.
representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. We commend the UAE as penholder and others involved from the region and from outside for the tremendous efforts to come with the text we just adopted. We welcome the adoption of this important resolution and consider it as an important step forward in dealing with the urgency of the dire situation in Gaza. We would have liked a more robust text, including on some important key issues that are missing there. But the text has clear merits which guided our position, and we welcome the establishment of a clear and straightforward mechanism to allow unhindered access for humanitarian assistance at scale to the population in Gaza and make a real difference on the ground. People in Gaza are going hungry. They need assistance. Countless families are in dire need. They must be helped now, today, and every day. Therefore, it is urgent for the UN to step up, and this is all of this resolution provides for: urgent steps to immediately allow safe, unhindered, and expanded humanitarian access at scale, and to create the conditions for a sustainable cessation of hostilities. Mr. President, we call for and look forward to the speedy and full implementation of this resolution. But we want to be clear: we support the cessation of hostilities with the aim to save civilians, to help innocent Palestinians rebuild their lives. All those who are trapped in a bloody conflict, children, women, entire families, everyone who doesn't deserve to suffer or die. Therefore, our vote in favor cannot and must not be seen, understood, or misused by Hamas in any way or any circumstance, directly or indirectly, as condoning the unacceptable and the unjustifiable, and for them to continue to use what belongs to and should go only to the people of Gaza to plan and attack Israel and its population, as they've been doing since October 7th. All Palestinians must unite under the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, pursue the path of peace and negotiations, and use all political means in order to build their future, have their state, and ensure their freedom and dignity, together and along with Israel living in security. It is a clear position we have expressed repeatedly during the last 2 years, and is one of the key wishes and hopes we will keep with us as we exit the Security Council. I thank you.
Agradezco al representante de
Thank the
Albania por su
representative of
declaración.
Albania for his
Tiene
statement.
ahora la palabra la
I now give the
representante
floor
de
to
Francia.
the representative of France.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
La France remercie les
France
Émirats arabes unis
thanks the
d'avoir
United
préparé
Arab
cette
Emirates
résolution.
for preparing this
Elle les
resolution
remercie de leurs efforts
and
tout au
would
long
like
du
to thank them
processus
for
de
their efforts
négociation.
throughout the negotiating
La
process.
France se félicite de l'adoption
France
ce jour
welcomes
d'une
the
résolution
adoption
qui
today
permet
of
de
a
répondre à
resolution
l'urgence
that
humanitaire
allows
sur
us
le
to
terrain
respond to the
et d'améliorer
humanitarian
l'acheminement de
emergency on
l'aide
the
à
ground
Gaza
and
alors que la
improve the
crise
delivery of
humanitaire
aid
s'aggrave
to
de jour en
Gaza at a
jour.
time when the humanitarian
Nous avons
crisis
tous
is
pris
worsening day
connaissance
by
hier
day.
de rapports faisant
Yesterday,
état d'un
we
risque
all saw the
sérieux de
reports of
famine
a
à
serious
Gaza
risk of famine
et le
in
secrétaire
Gaza,
général a tiré
and
la
the
sonnette
Secretary
d'alarme face à
General
la
raised the
tragédie
alarm
humanitaire en
over the
cours à Gaza.
humanitarian tragedy
Il
currently
est
underway in
urgent
Gaza.
d'acheminer
It is
davantage d'aide
urgent that
humanitaire
more
aux
humanitarian
populations civiles
assistance
de
be
Gaza
delivered to the
qui en
civilian
ont plus que
population
jamais
of
besoin.
Gaza that need it
Cette
more than
résolution
ever.
appelle à prendre des
This
mesures
resolution
urgentes
calls
pour
for
créer les
urgent
conditions d'une
steps
cessation
to be
durable des hostilités.
steps to be taken to create the conditions
Nous aurions
for
préféré que le
a
Conseil puisse s'exprimer de manière plus
sustainable cessation of
ambitieuse sur
hostilities.
ce
We would
sujet.
have preferred the Council
La
to be able
France
to
plaide
speak
depuis le
more
début du
ambitiously on
conflit
this
pour une trêve
subject. Since
humanitaire
the beginning of the
immédiate,
conflict, France has
durable
been
et
pleading
qui doit
for
conduire
an
à un
immediate,
cessez-le-feu pérenne.
durable humanitarian truce that
Comme
should
la
lead
résolution
to a lasting
2712, la
ceasefire.
résolution adoptée
Like
aujourd'hui
Resolution
demande à
2712,
nouveau
today's
la
resolution once
libération
again
immédiate
calls
et sans
for the
condition
immediate
des
and
otages.
unconditional release of
Ces résolutions
hostages.
doivent être
These
immédiatement
resolutions must be
respectées, mises en
immediately
œuvre, tout
respected
comme plus
and
largement le droit
implemented
international.
as international law more broadly must also
Cette
be.
résolution s'inscrit
This
également dans la lignée
resolution
des efforts de la
is
France
also
pour mobiliser la
along the lines
communauté
of France's
internationale
efforts to
face à l'ampleur
mobilize
de
the
la
international
crise,
community in the
comme
face
nous
of the
l'avons fait
scale
lors de
of
la
the
conférence
crisis, as we
internationale
did during the
humanitaire
International
organisée le 9
Humanitarian
novembre
Conference
dernier, qui a permis
organized on the
de
9th of
recueillir
November,
plus
which
d'1 milliard
allowed us
d'euros de
to gather
promesses
more than
de
€1 billion
C'est
in
pour ces raisons
promised
que la France
donations.
a
For
voté
these
en
reasons,
faveur de
France
cette
voted in
résolution.
favor of this resolution.
Le président de la République et la
The
ministre de
President of
l'Europe
the
et des
Republic
Affaires
and the Minister for
étrangères
Europe and Foreign
étaient en
Affairs
déplacement dans la région ces
visited
derniers
the region
jours.
in recent
En
days.
Jordanie, hier, le
In
président de la
Jordan,
République a soutenu
yesterday,
la
the
création
President
d'une
of the
plateforme
Republic supported the
humanitaire.
creation of a
Il a rappelé
humanitarian
l'importance
platform
cruciale
and
de
recalled the
travailler
crucial
immédiatement
importance
à un
of working
cessez-le-feu.
immediately on a
Seul un
ceasefire.
cessez-le-feu permettra
Only a
la
ceasefire will
réouverture d'un
allow for
horizon
the
politique
reopening of
indispensable.
a necessary
La France
political
rappelle que le
horizon.
droit international
France
humanitaire doit
recalls
être
that
appliqué
international
en
humanitarian
toutes
law must be
circonstances
applied in all
et qu'il faut pouvoir
circumstances
garantir
and
un
that
accès
it must
complet,
be possible
sûr,
to
sans
guarantee
entrave
complete, safe,
aux acteurs
unhindered
humanitaires. Et il
access
faut
for
protéger les
humanitarian
personnels
workers
humanitaires
and
ainsi que les
humanitarian
personnels
personnel
médicaux
as well
et
as medical
hospitaliers.
and hospital
Ce texte
staff
doit
must
désormais
be
être pleinement
protected.
appliqué.
This text must
Monsieur
be
le Président,
applied in full.
ce Conseil doit
Mr.
également
President,
condamner
this
dans les
Council
termes
must
les
also
plus forts
condemn
les
in the
attaques
strongest
terroristes qui ont
terms
été
the
commises
terrorist
par le
attacks
Hamas
committed by
et
Hamas
d'autres groupes
and other
terroristes le 7
terrorist groups
octobre
on the
dernier,
7th of
y compris
October,
les violences
including
sexuelles
sexual
qu'ils ont
violence
utilisées
that
pour
they used to
déshumaniser et
dehumanize
terroriser leurs
and
victimes.
terrorize their victims.
Il est
It is
incompréhensible que ce Conseil
incomprehensible
n'ait
that
toujours
this
pas pu
Council
le
has
faire.
still not been able to
Il
do
devra le
so.
faire et le
It
droit
should
et
do
la
so,
morale
must do so,
l'exigent.
and law and
La
morality
France
require
continuera de
it.
s'engager
France will
résolument dans la voie
continue
d'une
to
mobilisation
work
pleine et
resolutely
entière de ce Conseil
within the
sur
full and
l'ensemble des
complete
volets de la
mobilization
crise,
of this Council on
sécuritaire,
every aspect of the
humanitaire
crisis,
et
security,
politique.
humanitarian and
La France rappelle
political.
l'urgence de
France
mieux
recalls the
protéger la
urgent
vie
need
des
to better
civils
protect the
palestiniens
lives of
et de
Palestinian
contribuer à une
civilians
sortie de
and to
crise
contribute
rapide,
to a
fondée
rapid
sur la
end to the
solution à deux
crisis
États,
based on the
la
two-state
seule qui puisse
solution,
permettre de
which is the
construire
only
une paix
thing that
juste
can
et
allow for the
durable.
construction of
Je
a
vous
just and
remercie.
lasting peace. Thank you.
Agradezco a la representante de
I
Francia
thank
por
the
su
representative
declaración.
of France for
Tiene
her
ahora la
statement, and
palabra
I'll give
el
the floor to
representante de
the
Mozambique.
representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, I wish to begin by expressing our sincere appreciation to the United Arab Emirates for the tireless work made that led to the adoption of this resolution, which aims to respond to a humanitarian catastrophe currently unfolding in Gaza. Mozambique's vote in favor of the resolution reflects our strong commitment to the principle of protection of civilians currently in Gaza or during any armed conflict. We are mindful of the fact that this resolution is not a perfect test, but it clearly states the basic principles that must guide the parties and ought to be upheld by the world at large. As the Secretary General says and the international law asserts, even wars have laws that must be observed. In this connection, the resolution emphasized the importance of international humanitarian law and humanitarian access. It is an effort to respond to the critical role of humanitarian personnel. I repeat, it is an effort to respond to the critical role of humanitarian personnel in providing aid to civilians affected by the conflict. Mozambique's position is aligned with the global effort to safeguard civilians and uphold their rights during times of conflict. Together with other members of the Security Council, in our national capacity, we have been to Rafah Hospital, to the Rafah crossing border. We could see with our own eyes and feel with our own hearts the tragedy that has befallen the Palestinian people. We therefore strongly believe that this resolution is an important step towards alleviating the humanitarian needs of the Palestinian civilian population throughout the Gaza Strip. The civilians in Gaza need enough food, water, sanitation, electricity, telecommunication, and medical service for their immediate survival. By voting in favor, we emphasize the critical need for urgent humanitarian aid to reach civilians in Gaza during this ongoing conflict. The situation is dire, and the immediate action is necessary to prevent further humanitarian suffering. We reiterate the urgency of this demand to the parties in conflict to allow and facilitate access by all possible means and forms of humanitarian aid to the civilians in Gaza. This resolution is also crucial to operationalize implementation of Resolution 2712. However, the best alternative for peace to prevail in Gaza Strip remains a durable and sustained cessation of hostilities and a return to a constructive dialogue between the parties. Mr. President, we reiterate Mozambique's call for dialogue between Israel and Palestine. In the midst of long-standing tensions, open communication remains essential for a negotiated settlement of conflicts. We hope that both parties will heed this call and work towards a constructive dialogue that can pave the way for understanding and reconciliation. We strongly believe that the Palestinian people and the Israeli people can live and coexist side by side in security and peace, in fulfillment of numerous decisions and resolutions of the Security Council and of the General Assembly. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco al representante de
I thank the
Mozambique
representative
por
of
su declaración.
Mozambique for his
Tiene ahora
statement.
la palabra
And I
el
give the floor
representante
to
de
the
Ghana.
representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, let me begin by commending the UAE for all the efforts they've put into this resolution to enable the Council to obtain an outcome that we hope would scale up the delivery of humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza. While we believe it is time for hostilities to end and for dialogue and diplomacy to be given its chance, Ghana voted in favor of Resolution 2720 because with so many lives lost, mostly women and children, and many more on the verge of starvation, famine, and pestilence, it is imperative that we take every opportunity that can help save lives, facilitate humanitarian access and delivery to the millions of civilians in Gaza, and address the deteriorating humanitarian conditions on the ground. As the resolution we have adopted rightly emphasizes, all parties to the conflict have an obligation to comply with international law, in particular as it impacts the protection of civilians and their well-being. The need to fully respect United Nations premises and its personnel and assets cannot also be overemphasized. We welcome the decision to open the Karem Salem border crossings to enhance the delivery of humanitarian assistance and urge the easing of all rigid procedures to speed up the delivery of humanitarian assistance. We also reiterate the call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Mr. President, as this would be Ghana's final remarks on this subject during our present membership of the Security Council, we urge the Council not to lose sight of its historical responsibility for the implementation of the two-state solution, even in this most darkest of moments. We believe, as we have often stated, that the two-state solution on the basis of the 1967 borders with Jerusalem as the shared capital is the key to the resolution of the instability in the Middle East. In this regard, the renewal of the political horizon should be a commitment that the Council should not waver from. Finally, we express the hope that the implementation of the resolution just adopted will be done in good faith to save human lives in both the Gaza Strip and Israel, and see the appointment by the Secretary General of a representative in this regard as important. May the coming year open new paths of opportunity to resolve this decades-long conflict. I thank you.
Agradezco al representante de
I thank
Ghana
the
por
representative of Ghana.
palabra del representante de la Federación
And now
Rusa.
give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, earlier when I introduced our amendment, I said that the vote on it would be a moment of truth. And that's what happened. The United States once again exposed their true face in front of the entire world, blocking an even extremely weak call on the part of the Council for a cessation of hostilities in Gaza. Instead of that, Washington is playing an extremely underhanded game, forcing into the text an essential license for Israel to kill Palestinian civilians in Gaza under the pretext and quote of creating conditions for a cessation of hostilities. Today at the briefing, the coordinator on strategic communications of the National Security Council of the White House, John Kirby, said that the Israeli authorities understand the need to lower the intensity of the fighting in the Gaza Strip. It's up to them to take the decision about the timeline of when that would take place. Colleagues, this is a tragic moment for the Council, not a moment of the triumph of multilateral diplomacy, but rather one of a gross, unprincipled blackmail and open scorn on the part of Washington for the suffering of Palestinians and the hopes of the global community to put an end to all of this. Today, the permanent representative of the USA spoke about the direct bilateral diplomacy of Washington at a high level. Previously, we've heard this argument, and we can see what it has led to. The Security Council essentially is being asked not to get in the way while the United States goes around twisting arms in the region, not for the sake of peace, as my American colleague asserts, but for the sake of ensuring the mercantile short-term interests of Washington. Colleagues, if this document weren't supported by a number of Arab states, we would, of course, have vetoed it. At the same time, we also note that a number of the co-sponsors, including Arab states, withdrew their co-sponsorship. But we consistently are of the view that the Arab world is itself able to take decisions and bear full responsibility for them. This is the only reason why we did not block this document. But I want to once again underscore, we categorically do not agree with the content of the current OP2, and we are of the view that responsibility for all possible consequences lies with those states that gave their consent to its wording that was forced through by the United States. We will not put our names to this. Distinguished colleagues, regardless of the outcomes of today's vote, a clear demand by the Security Council for a full-fledged ceasefire remains the imperative. Without that, as the experience of Security Council Resolution 2712 has already shown, implementing the Security Council's resolutions in Gaza is simply impossible. On the 8th of December, during his statement in the Council, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, unambiguously stated this, and the same conclusion emerges from his letter to the Council with options for monitoring Resolution 2712. We are of the view that whatever the resistance may be, and however much they might protect their main ally in the United States, in the region by the United States, the Council will get back to this issue and precisely and unambiguously demand a cessation of hostilities. Thank you.
Agradezco al representante de la
I thank
Federación
the
Rusa por su
representative of the
declaración.
Russian Federation
Tiene ahora
for
la
his
palabra
statement,
la
and now
representante
give
de
the floor
Emiratos
to
Árabes
the
Unidos.
representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, for the record, I'd like to state that the draft resolution that was put in blue on Friday evening did receive 83 co-sponsors from this membership, but that this resolution was not open for co-sponsorship due to the last-minute nature of the negotiations and due to the fact that it was put in blue only this morning. So no one withdrew from their co-sponsorship. It hasn't been open to co-sponsorship, but I'm sure it would receive widespread support if it had. I'd like to reflect on the vote we just held and what it says, though, about this conflict and this body. We welcome its adoption, and we're grateful for this Council's support. We believe that the resolution begins to unblock life-saving aid, whose denial has condemned more than 500,000 people in Gaza to famine. The text compels the international community to finally share in the burden that Egypt has been shouldering, and it commits all of us to breaking the cruel blockade strangling Gaza for the last 16 years. But the Palestinian struggle is singular in how every instance of progress serves as a reminder of the scale of the tragedy. It is not lost on us that while today we start building a humanitarian architecture that responds to an intolerable situation, we are still unable to stop the war. It is not lost on us that despite the incalculable damage visited upon them with impunity, Palestinians are asked to accept that diplomacy is the art of what is possible. It is not lost on us that even though what has been possible has been brutally inadequate, they have kept faith with this international system. But what is possible is not predetermined. It is the product of active choices. The collective choices of this Council, influenced by its structure, have shaped this grim reality. They can help shape a different future. Doing that must begin by understanding that 30 years after they recognize the State of Israel, there is very little left for the Palestinians to concede. The injustice of the occupation persists with the international community's complicity. If you have a moral, national, or political interest in saving the two-state solution, you must act now. This resolution gives us an opportunity to demonstrate that at the very least, the world will not tolerate the continued deprivation of the people of Gaza from basic necessities. It puts in place a system that is necessary now and that will remain necessary when the war ends. We are all responsible for making sure that it works. Mr. President, we thank each and every Council member for their dedication and support to this process, including the E10 for their steadfast unity on this file. And I'd like to thank the United States again, and the United Kingdom for their important, constructive diplomatic work behind the scenes on this. I'd also like to thank the Ecuadorian presidency for their patience and wisdom in enabling this adoption despite really challenging negotiations. And to the United States, I'd like to thank Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, whose personal dedication and commitment to help save lives made today possible. This outcome will enable life-saving humanitarian assistance to get into Gaza and reach those in need. It will quite literally make the difference between life and death for hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians. It is vital that this Council lives up to its responsibility by ensuring its full implementation. But as we help save lives here in Gaza, so too we must focus here on restoring the hope in resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Today's resolution is an important step on the long journey ahead. Any lasting and comprehensive solution demands an end to the war in Gaza, addressing the dramatic situation of those internally displaced, uniting Gaza and the West Bank under a single, legitimate and representative Palestinian authority, reconstructing what has been destroyed, and ensuring that never again shall violence, incitement and terror be allowed to thrive. None of this will be sustainable if there is no equality between Israelis and Palestinians in charting their shared destiny together. It can never be a just peace if equality and dignity are not the basis of it. This resolution gives us a signal of that political horizon ahead. The two-state solution with an independent and sovereign Palestinian state is the only path to achieving a just peace that guarantees security, stability, and prosperity for the Palestinian and Israeli people alike, who both have a right to statehood in their ancestral land. The UAE will never tire in its pursuit of that goal. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for her statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Ecuador.
El Ecuador ha votado a favor del proyecto que
The
acabamos de
Council has
considerar,
voted in favor of
que ha
the
sido
draft
fruto de
that
un
we have been
laborioso
considering.
proceso de
This was the
negociación cuyo
outcome
éxito
of
demuestra la
careful
buena fe
negotiations,
y
and
el
this shows the
espíritu
good faith and the
constructivo
constructive spirit
que pueden alcanzar.
that can achieve
Valoramos
this.
la voluntad
We very
demostrada
much
por todos
appreciate
los
the
miembros y
willingness
esperamos
shown
que
by
esta
all
dinámica
members,
se
and we
pueda
hope
repetir
that
en
this
otros temas.
will be repeated
La situación
in other
humanitaria
matters.
en Gaza
The
es
humanitarian
desesperada y
situation
desesperante.
in Gaza
Varios
is
de nosotros la
disastrous,
pudimos ver en
despairing
persona durante
situation.
la visita la semana
During our
pasada
visit last week,
y su alivio
we saw
es y
so many
debe ser
people
una prioridad.
suffering, and
La ayuda
the
que llega a la
alleviation of their
franja
suffering
no es
must be our
suficiente para cubrir
priority.
las
The
necesidades
aid
de
that
la
has
población
reached
civil.
Gaza is not sufficient for the
El
civilian
texto que hemos votado
population.
tiene
The
como
text that
objetivo
we
un
have
aumento
voted
significativo
aims
de
to
la cantidad de
significantly
ayuda
increase the
y
quantity
llama a
of
dar los
aid
pasos
and
necesarios
calls for
para
the
hacerlo
necessary
posible.
steps to be taken to
En
make
esa
this
línea,
possible.
pide incrementar
In
las
this regard,
rutas
it
de
calls
entrada,
for
así como
an
crear
increase
mecanismos
in
para
the
optimizar
access
los
and to
procesos de
optimize
inspección.
the inspection
Para el
processes.
Ecuador,
For Ecuador,
es de vital
it
importancia
is
que
of
la ayuda
vital
humanitaria sea
importance that
suficiente y
humanitarian aid
continua,
be
y al mismo tiempo
delivered in
que
sufficient
sea objeto de
quantities,
inspecciones
and
adecuadas,
that there be
para que
adequate
sea segura
inspections to
y
ensure
confiable. Esta resolución
that those
en nada
inspections are
contradice lo
reliable.
dispuesto el mes
This
pasado en la resolución
resolution in
2712
no way
y debe
contravenes
ser un
the
paso
previous
adicional
resolution
hacia un cese al
2712
fuego
and should be
humanitario que consideramos
seen as an additional
ineludible
step
y urgente.
towards the urgent need for a ceasefire.
En el texto, este
Excellencies,
Consejo
in
deplora
this
las
text,
violaciones del
the
derecho
Council
internacional
deplores the
humanitario,
violations of
de
international
violencia contra
humanitarian law,
civiles y
violence
los
against
actos de
civilians,
terrorismo.
and acts of
También
terrorism.
demanda la
And it
liberación
also
inmediata e incondicional de todos
demands
los
the
rehenes.
unconditional
No puede
immediate
ser de otra
release of
manera.
all hostages. It
El
couldn't
Ecuador
be
reitera su
otherwise.
frontal condena de los
Ecuador
actos terroristas
repeats our
perpetrados por
robust
Hamas a partir del
condemnation of
7 de
the acts
octubre
committed by
y
Hamas on the 7th
considera
of
que el texto
October,
podría
and we
haber
believe that the
mencionado
text could
claramente
have
el hecho de
clearly
que los
mentioned the
rehenes
fact that the
están en poder de
hostages
Hamas
are
y
in the
otros
hands
grupos,
of Hamas and
pero
other
entiende que lo
groups.
perfecto es enemigo de lo bueno
But
y que la
you
principal
cannot always
prioridad
get a perfect
es la
text,
humanitaria.
and the important thing is the
Asimismo,
humanitarian aspect here.
Es de gran
And it's
importancia
also
que,
very
en
important
momentos como el
that
actual,
at
el
times such
texto
as
reitera
these,
el
the
compromiso de este
text
Consejo con
reiterates
la
the
solución
commitment
de
of
dos
this Council
estados.
to the
El
two-state
Ecuador está
solution, and
convencido de que
Ecuador
este
is
es el único
convinced that
camino
this
hacia
is
la
the
paz
only
y
path
la seguridad
towards
en la
peace
zona.
and security in the area.
Hacemos votos para que
And
esta
we
resolución
hope that
pueda
this
ser
resolution
implementada con la
can be
urgencia del caso
implemented
y
urgently given the
contribuye
situation
efectivamente a
and
aliviar
will
la
effectively
situación humanitaria
contribute
en
to
Gaza.
alleviating the humanitarian
Deseo
situation in
felicitar a la
Gaza. I'd like
delegación
to
de Emiratos Árabes
congratulate the
Unidos,
United Arab
que
Emirates
este mes
delegation,
termina su periodo en este Consejo
which
y ha
this
liderado
month
la
is
negociación de esta
ending
importante
their
resolución,
membership of the
cuya
Council,
adopción durante nuestra presidencia nos complace.
we are very happy to see
El
that this
Ecuador se ha
resolution was
esforzado
approved
para
under
ejercer
our
una presidencia
presidency.
constructiva y
Ecuador
responsable,
has tried to be a
durante la
responsible
cual sus máximas
presidency,
autoridades, el presidente Noboa y la
and
canciller
President
Sommerfeld,
Noboa
han
and
visitado este
Foreign
Consejo y
Minister
han procurado tender puentes
have
que hagan
visited New
posibles
York and tried
resultados como el de
to
hoy.
create bridges
Para
that made this
concluir,
kind of thing possible that
permítame
we've seen
agradecer a
today.
todos los
I'd
miembros
also like to thank
salientes,
all
Albania,
outgoing members,
Brasil,
Albania, Brazil,
Emiratos Árabes
the
Unidos,
United Arab
Gabón
Emirates,
y
Gabon,
Ghana,
and Ghana,
por contribuciones
for
e
their
incansable trabajo en
tireless
los dos últimos
contributions
años en el
to our
Consejo de
work
Seguridad.
in the last 2 years.
Retomo ahora
And now I
el rol
resume
como
my
presidente del
functions
Consejo.
as President of the
Doy
Council.
ahora la palabra
I give the floor
al observador
to the
permanente del
permanent
Estado
observer
observador
of the
de
Observer
Palestina.
State of Palestine.
Mr. President, this conflict this Council first met to address this grave crisis when hundreds of Palestinians had been killed by Israel, the occupying power, in its siege and aggression on the Gaza Strip. The Council is now meeting after over 20,000 Palestinians have been killed, almost half of them children, and 60,000 people have been wounded, and 2 million Palestinians have been forcefully displaced. It is meeting as homes, shelters, schools, hospitals have been destroyed, and as hunger and disease are spreading like wildfire. No one should forget that what we are talking about are 2.3 million Palestinians who have been fighting for their life and facing death every single day for 75 days. They have been fighting for their lives, for their very existence for over 75 days. Mr. President, the Arab and the OIC groups, with the support of an overwhelming number of UN member states have been mobilizing for 3 objectives, and we said that from the beginning. End the carnage immediately, immediate ceasefire, humanitarian assistance at scale, and no forced displacement. We meet today as part of this continuous effort to advance these 3 goals. Mr. President, allow me at the onset to pay tribute to all the humanitarian and health care workers who, at peril to their own lives, are struggling every single day to address and alleviate an occupation-made humanitarian catastrophe of unprecedented scale. They are operating under conditions where no place and no one is safe, under widespread and indiscriminate bombing, where hospitals and shelters and ambulances are shelled, and with minimal to no access to humanitarian supplies necessary to sustain and save lives. We pay tribute to the Palestine Red Crescent, in which many of you have met them in your trip to the Rafah crossing, to Palestinian medical and civilian rescue teams, to the personnel of the United Nations and its agencies, notably UNRWA, to the members of Palestinian and international humanitarian organizations on the ground, and to the ICRC. Their work is heroic and deserves our utmost recognition and respect. The draft resolution presented by the United Arab Emirates is to allow them to conduct their sacred mission to assist civilians in need to save human lives as Israel, the occupying power, continues to ignore the global demands for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and to deprive the Palestinian people of the humanitarian aid they desperately need. There are thousands of trucks of humanitarian aid on the Egyptian side, and Egypt's full willingness and mobilization to see this aid delivered. You saw those thousands of truckloads from your trip from Al Arish Airport to the Rafah crossing. There are over 2 million Palestinians in desperate need of such aid on the Palestinian side. This inhumane and criminal Israeli siege, this use of humanitarian aid necessary for the survival of the population as method of war has to end, and it has to end now. Mr. President, on 4th of November, the deputy head of the Israeli civil administration stated from inside Gaza, and I quote, whoever returns here, if they return here after, will find scorched earth, no houses, no agriculture, no nothing. They have no future. End of quotation. This is just one statement among far too many, demonstrating in shocking terms that what we are dealing with is an attempt at the destruction of our people and their displacement forever from their land. This is Israel's goal, its true objective. No future for Palestinians in Palestine. That is why it is bombing everyone and everything. That is why it targets homes, hospitals, schools, bakeries, agricultural fields, water and sanitation networks, so that sustenance of life becomes impossible, and it has become impossible. That is why it targets the landmarks of Gaza, which stand witness of its ancient history and of our roots in the land, our historic churches and mosques, our monuments, and our architecture. Israel also targets the storytellers, those who capture our people's lives, suffering, and death, including the journalists conveying to the world the truth about the massacres, about this grave and unbearable injustice being endured by Palestinian people and their families. But Israel's target is not only the past and the present of our people, but indeed the future. That is why it kills our doctors, engineers, poets, academics, artists. This is why it is destroying our cities and towns, our universities and cultural institutions. That is why it kills our children and terrorizes and traumatizes them, scaring and disfiguring their futures. We often quote the number of children killed, an unbearable tragedy, but we should not forget the 25,000 children orphaned and the tens of thousands wounded and amputated. A 12-year-old Palestinian girl with the most beautiful of names, Dunya, which means Dunya in Arabic, it means the whole world, lost both her parents, her sister, and her brother, all killed in Israeli shelling of her house. She also lost her leg, and I believe she was interviewed by the CNN journalist that United Arab Emirates managed to let her enter the Gaza Strip and to make that important report that she did. And Dunya said that while she will never forget her loved ones, she has to continue living, that she would become a doctor to help children as doctors helped her. But Dunya did not live to become a doctor or to memorialize her family. She was killed a few days later in the strike in the maternity ward of Al-Nasr Hospital. Israel wants to convince us that we need to choose between life and our country by making life in our country impossible. Our people want to live in their country. They want their children to grow safely in their country. There is no simpler dream, there is no aspiration more sacred than that. Mr. President, Israel's treatment of Palestinian civilians and its abhorrent crimes against them were further starkly revealed after Israel killed 3 people raising a white flag and representing no danger. It later discovered that they were 3 Israelis who had been held captive in Gaza. It could have saved them had it observed the laws of war, but it thought they were Palestinians and shot them. And yet, another display of total abject disregard for Palestinian lives. This confirms the many reports of summary executions of Palestinians being murdered in cold blood by Israeli soldiers in Gaza. Israel has also continued its ill treatment and mass arrest and humiliation of Palestinians in despicable scenes filmed by its own soldiers, boasting about their depravity. Those are the soldiers of a ragu army, unhinged and empowered by the impunity it enjoys, certain that it will not be held accountable, an army that commits atrocities every single day. In the words of Israelis' closest allies, its indiscriminate bombing and its killing rage needs to stop. That means its crimes need to stop. Gaza is like a patient whose wounds you are trying to treat while the killer keeps shooting at them. You need to stop the killer, or you will never be able to save the patient. Mr. President, death is everywhere in Gaza, in its different manifestations: destruction, deprivation, disease. People are starving. They have no water, no food, no medicine, or barely any. The draft resolution that the Council voted on today is intended to help address this inhumane situation, to alleviate the untold suffering and pain being borne by millions of civilians. We welcome the decision to establish a UN mechanisms to accelerate the provision of humanitarian relief consignments to Gaza and call for its rapid implementation. The Council also called for urgent steps to immediately allow safe, unhindered, and expanded humanitarian access. The Secretary General and all UN agencies, as well as humanitarian organizations, have all said that this requires an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, now backed by 153 states around the world. It took this Council 75 days to finally utter the word cessation of hostilities. To utter the word cessation of hostilities. 40 days after the General Assembly first referred to that objective and tens of thousands of Palestinians killed later. We support the Russian amendment, and the United Arab Emirates, as Arab representative, reflected that support in its vote. Of course, that paragraph, which was endorsed in the blue form, the original one, by the 83 co-sponsors. The resolution is also clear about the unwavering commitment to the two-state solution consistent with international law and UN resolutions, and in this context, on the status of the Gaza Strip as an integral part of the territory occupied in 1967 and as part of the Palestinian state, and on the unity of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and the role of the Palestinian Authority, and the complete rejection of forced displacement in violation of international law. Mr. President, let us act now to save lives, to provide life-saving assistance and life-sustaining hope. This resolution is a step in the right direction. It must be implemented and must be accompanied by massive pressure for an immediate ceasefire. I repeat, immediate ceasefire. There is no way to stop the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide underway, but an immediate ceasefire. Ceasefire again. There is no way to start addressing the occupation-made humanitarian catastrophe, but an immediate ceasefire. Ceasefire again. There is no way to release those held captive, but an immediate ceasefire. This resolution calls for protection of civilians, deplores attacks against civilians, rejects forced displacement, calls for immediate and safe humanitarian access, and for humanitarian aid reaching the Palestinian population. All that requires an immediate ceasefire. Immediate ceasefire. as requested and as called for by the Secretary General in his famous letter to the Security Council. Humanity must prevail. International law must prevail. Millions of lives hang in the balance. And I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Agradezco al observador permanente del
I thank
Estado
the permanent
observador
observer of the
de
Observer
Palestina
State of Palestine for
Doy
his
ahora la
statement.
palabra al
I now give the
representante de
floor to
Israel.
the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a week ago, Jaish al-Adl carried out a terror attack in Iran in which 11 Iranian police officers were killed. Within one day, the Security Council released a statement condemning the act of terror. It took the Security Council one day to express their condolences and sympathy with the families of the victims. It's true, terrorism must be condemned, even if the attacks are perpetrated against police officers of a rogue regime and the world's leading sponsor of global terror. Mr. President, 77 days ago, Hamas intentionally murdered, raped, and mutilated 1,300 Israelis and took 250 hostages, and this Council still has yet to issue a single statement condemning Hamas and their atrocities. In addition to the Council's inability to condemn Hamas's attack, the 130 hostages, women, children, and the elderly are still being held in Gaza and must not be allowed to become a footnote. Humanitarian aid is pouring into Gaza every single day, yet the hostages being held by Hamas are not even allowed visits by the Red Cross. This is the most heinous war crime imaginable. The hostages must be at the top of this Council's agenda. Council members, there is no doubt that humanitarian aid is crucially important. Israel is already facilitating hundreds of truckloads of aid into Gaza every day. Israel is also willing and able to exponentially increase the entry of aid trucks into Gaza. Israel has already opened the Kerem Shalom crossing in order to ensure the entry of more trucks, and has also facilitated the entry of dozens of trucks that arrived from Jordan. The only roadblock for aid entry is the UN's ability to accept them. Enhancing UN monitoring or coordination of aid is not a cure-all, and any enhancement of UN aid monitoring cannot be done at the expense of Israel's security inspections. Israel not only has a right but an obligation to guarantee its security. This is why our mission to eliminate Hamas's capabilities has not changed, and this is why security inspections of aid will not change. Israel will not permit the regrouping and rearming of Hamas, as the atrocities of October 7th can never be allowed to repeat themselves. Israel recently exposed another huge Hamas terror tunnel that stretches 4 kilometers, was constructed 50 meters underground. This terror tunnel is wide enough for vehicles to drive through and can house hundreds of terrorists. The amount of cement and equipment needed to build this tunnel alone is immense. This is just one part of Hamas's subterranean city of terror, the missile and rocket manufacturing facilities, and terrorist training complexes across Gaza. It cannot be claimed that Israel did not give any warning. For years, we have sent letters outlining Hamas's terror threat and growing capabilities. We have held countless meetings with officials. We have done everything possible to make it clear that action must be taken. But our words fell on deaf ears. Mr. President, if this Council seeks to end hostilities, it should start by supporting Israel's mission of returning the hostages and eliminating the Hamas threat. At the very least, it must prevent Hamas's empowerment. Just as this Council is committed to increasing aid, it should also be committed to blocking the smuggling of arms and transfer of weapons to the Hamas terrorists. And just as this Council is committed to ensuring aid reaches Gazan civilians, it should also be committed to ensuring the said aid is not diverted into Hamas terrorists who do not care about the civilian population. The focus of any resolution should also hold Hamas accountable, while taking every step to prevent them from entrenching themselves and regaining power. Mr. President, Hamas is a genocidal terror organization. Hamas is a direct threat to the security of Israel, to Gazans, and regional stability. In order to promote security, this Council should first recognize Hamas's terror regime and then focus on the elimination of its threats. It should be focused on freeing the hostages. It should be focused on preventing Hamas from exploiting aid. It should be focused on ensuring Hamas can no longer expand their terror infrastructure. Any resolution adopted by this Council should be focused primarily on these points, and this is the Council's responsibility, and this is key to security. I thank you, Mr. President.
representante de Israel por su declaración.
I thank the representative
Tiene ahora la
of Israel
palabra
for their
el
statement.
representante de
I give the
Egipto.
floor now to the representative of Egypt.
شكرا سيد الرئيس متحدثا باسم مصر
Thank you,
أتقدم
Mr.
إليكم
President.
بالتهنئة على
On
نجاح
behalf of
مجلس
Egypt,
الأمن اليوم
I congratulate you
باعتماد
on
مشروع
the
قرار
success
هام
of the
ومؤثر
Security
من
Council
شأنه تسهيل
in
النفاذ
adopting
الإنساني
today an
وزيادة
important
حجم المساعدات
resolution that
المقدمة
will
إلى
facilitate
قطاع غزة
the delivery of
وذلك من
human
خلال قيام
aid to
السكرتير
Gaza.
العام للأمم المتحدة تعيين منسق
As the
للشؤون
Secretary
الإنسانية
General
وإعادة الأعمار
will assign
يطلع بمهام تيسير
a
وتنسيق
humanitarian affairs
المساعدات
coordinator
وإنشاء
who will
آلية أممية إنسانية
facilitate and
تعمل
coordinate
داخل قطاع
the
غزة
aid and will
تحت راية
establish
الأمم
a
المتحدة
mechanism, UN humanitarian
تحتمي بها
mechanism
الآلية
to work inside
آلية
Gaza
وتعمل
under the
تحت
UN
إشرافها بهدف التعامل مع الكارثة
to address
الإنسانية المروعة
the
التي
horrific
يتعرض لها سكان
humanitarian
القطاع
crisis
للشهر الثالث على التوالي
endured by the
الحرب
people
المدمرة
in the Gaza Strip for the
التي
third
تشنها
month
إسرائيل على الشعب
consecutively as a
الفلسطيني
result of the lethal, devastating war
وأتقدم بالشكر
by
أيضا
Israel on
لدولة
the
الإمارات
defenseless
العربية
people of
المتحدة
Palestine. I would also
وبعثتها في
like
الأمم
to thank
المتحدة
the UAE and
للجهود
its submission
الدؤوبة
to the
والمخلصة
UN for
التي
its
قامت بها
relentless, sincere efforts
بالتشاور المكثف مع الدول أعضاء مجلس الأمن
in
والمنظمات
its
الأممية
intensive
وصولا
consultations with
لاعتماد
members
هذا
of the Security
القرار
Council and UN
وبذل
agencies
كافة
that
السبل
led to the
لإنجاحه
adoption of this
جزيل الشكر
resolution.
لكم على
And we
جهودكم
thank the UAE for ensuring
سيد الرئيس
success
مشروع القرار
of
الذي
this
تم
adoption.
اعتماده اليوم
Mr.
يبني
President,
على
the adoption of today's
مشروع
resolution
القرار المتكامل السابق
builds on
الذي
the
تقدمت به
previous
المجموعتان العربية
comprehensive
والإسلامية
resolution submitted
ورعته
by the Arab and
81
Islamic
دولة
groups,
تنفيذا لمقررات قمة
co-sponsored
الرياضة
by
العربية
81
الإسلامية الاستثنائية في 11
in
نوفمبر الماضي
implementation of the decision of the
بخصوص
Special
كسر
Islamic
الحصار
Arab Summit
الإنساني
in Riyadh
المفروض على
held
أشقائنا
on
الفلسطينيين
November
في غزة
last, related to lifting
وصدور
the
هذا القرار
humanitarian
اليوم
blockade
خطوة على الطريق
imposed on our
الصحيح
brothers in Gaza.
لمعالجة
Today's
التداعيات الإنسانية
resolution is
الدامية
a step on the right
للحرب على غزة
way to
وضمان
address the
استمرارية
humanitarian
ودوام نفاذ المساعدات للقطاع
impact
دون عوائق
of this war
عبر آلية
in Gaza and
تشرف عليها الأمم
ensure
المتحدة
that
بحيث
aid
لا يترك العمل الإنساني رهينة
will be delivered
لإرادة القوى
without
القائمة بالاحتلال
will be delivered
التي لا
unhindered
يمكن
through
عقلا
a
ولا
mechanism
قانونا
under the supervision
اعتبارها
by the
طرفا
UN.
محايدا لتقديم الدعم
So the
الإنساني.
humanitarian work will not remain
نتطلع
hostage
سيد
to
الرئيس
the
أن
will
يساهم
of the
هذا
occupying
القرار
power, the power
في
that
دعم
cannot be
جهود
perceived
المجتمع الدولي
legally
لمساعدة
or
قطاع غزة
reasonably as a neutral
الذي ورغم
party
الجهود
when
المصرية
it comes to
المضنية
the delivery of humanitarian
لتقديم
support.
كل المساعدات
Mr.
القصوى
President,
الممكنة
we are looking forward
للأشقاء
for this
الفلسطينيين
resolution
ورغم
to
اقتسامنا
support efforts of international
الكساء
community
والغذاء والدواء معهم
to provide aid to Gaza.
ما زال يشهد كارثة إنسانية مروعة لا مثيل لها منذ الحرب
Gaza
العالمية
Strip that
الثانية
is witnessing
وذلك على ضوء سقوط أكثر من 20,000
humanitarian
شهيد
crisis unprecedented since
أكثر من
World War
70%
II.
منهم من النساء والأطفال وأكثر من
that
53,000
led
جريحا
to the killing of more than
إضافة إلى النقص
20,000.
الحاد في
Most of them,
المواد الغذائية والأدوية
70% of
غزة
them are women
تعاني
and
حصار
children,
التجويع
and more
سيد
than
الرئيس
53
والتدمير
injured.
الشامل للبنية التحتية الأساسية
Gaza
والمنازل
is starving. Houses
والمستشفيات
are
والمراكز
destroyed.
الطبية
Hospitals
إن هذا الوضع الكارثي
and the medical
يتزامن مع
facilities
تصاعد
are destroyed.
الاقتحامات التي يقوم بها الجيش.
Gaza is starving. Houses are destroyed. Hospitals and the medical facilities are destroyed. This is accompanied by the attacks by Israel on the West Bank, causing casualties. That's in addition to the continued attacks by settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which might lead to a spiral of violence in Palestine. Mr. President, Egypt expresses its thanks and appreciation to the Secretary General. We thank him again for his efforts over the past period and continuous calls for humanitarian ceasefire. We thank him for calling the attention of the Security Council to the threat to international peace and security posed by the situation in Gaza. We thank him for the letter he addressed to the Security Council invoking Article 99. We also express our appreciation to the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Philip Lazzarini. We pay tribute to all the staff on UNRWA, first for the sacrifices made by UNRWA and the efforts it made in the hardest conditions in Gaza, and also for the Commissioner General who addressed the General Assembly highlighting the collapse of the humanitarian situation in Gaza. This bolstered our pursuits and endeavors to submit the draft resolution to support humanitarian efforts. Mr. President, now that the Security Council has adopted a resolution we look forward to the agencies and bodies of the UN to implement it without delay and immediately. Agencies should make concerted efforts to draw up a comprehensive plan that will translate this resolution into a functioning and effective mechanism in full coordination with the international community. This is a first step that should be followed by other steps. First of which is to oblige Israel, the occupying power, to immediately cease fire and halt hostilities, all hostilities, without any condition in all parts of Gaza. All efforts that aim at alleviating the humanitarian crisis and supporting the humanitarian condition will bear fruit only when the Security Council implements a binding resolution on comprehensive and lasting ceasefire and the cessation of hostilities throughout Gaza without any condition, and to end the killing of civilians and allow for humanitarian work and provide protection and security to humanitarian workers. This demand for comprehensive ceasefire is a response to the will of the international community, that will that is expressed on many occasions, the last of which was the resolution adopted in the General Assembly in its 10th emergency special session on December 12th that called for humanitarian ceasefire. The resolution garnered 153 votes in favor, which reflects a global consensus that cannot be argued that the resolution is not binding politically or legally. Mr. President, we stress that the draft resolution adopted today has not been confined to humanitarian aspects only. It has focused on other items that should be implemented. It stressed that obligations under international law should be respected. Civilians should be protected. Humanitarian workers should be protected. Relief trucks should be protected. Civilians should not be forcibly transferred. The resolution also stressed that the unity of the Palestinian territory in Gaza Strip and the West Bank under a national Palestinian Authority should be respected. These are all not any less important than the humanitarian aspect. In this connection, Egypt reiterates the importance of creating a political prospect and resume the negotiations that realizes the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people in establishing its independent state along the June 4th, 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. This is the only path to ensure achieving comprehensive and just peace in the region and ensure security and stability for the peoples of the region. Mr. President, your success today gives a glimmer of hope. Though dim, yet it should be upheld and should be built upon to put an end to the horrific humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We call upon you to make all concerted efforts to put an end to the war and end the massive suffering endured by the defenseless Palestinian people for 3 months. Mr. President, we call upon you to make efforts to end the bloodshed of the innocent people and to save the lives of innocent people. These are the most noble goals of the Security Council and the UN at large. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Egypt for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. Before adjourning the meeting, as this is the last scheduled meeting of the Council for the month of December, I would like to express the sincere appreciation of the delegation of Ecuador to the members of the Council and to the Secretariat of the Council for all the support they have given us. Indeed, it has been a busy month and one in which we rallied to consensus on several important issues within our purview. We could not have done it alone, and without the hard work, support and positive contributions of every delegation and the representatives of the Secretariat, including the technical support team, conference service officers, interpreters, translators, verbatim reporters and security staff. As we end our presidency, as it draws to a close, I know I speak on behalf of the Council in wishing the delegation of France good luck in the month of January. On behalf of the Council, I'd also like to express sincere thanks of the Council to the 5 outgoing members, Albania, Brazil, Gabon, Ghana and the United Arab Emirates. I commend their hard work and contributions during their terms on the Security Council. The meeting is adjourned.